shot over here. Okay. Here are the answers to the handout that we just went over together. The answers are 7A, 8C, 9D, and 10B. We're going to switch back over to the PowerPoint. Okay, well, instead of hot dogs and hamburgers or beef and pork, in real life, where does most of our money go when we're looking at the typical basket of goods and services for a typical household? Would you all agree most of your money goes to rent or housing, and then food, gas in your car? Those are the big categories. And, you know, your author mentions for older people, this slice of the pie may get to be a little bit bigger than 6, but this is, you know, typical average. There's also something called the producer price index, and as you can imagine, these are things that firms or companies buy, like raw materials or lumber or steel. When this goes up, what's going to happen to the consumer price index? It's going to go up next, right? So if producers' prices for raw materials starts to go up, we watch this. This is an economic indicator, and it tells us, you know, what might we expect with the CPI next. Okay, well, you know what the CPI is and how to calculate a simple one now. There are some problems. It's not a perfect measure of our of inflation. How many people now only use a cell phone? They don't have a landline in their apartment or house anymore. Okay, about half the class. Okay, well, what do we do when, in our previous period, we had household landlines and cell phones as 2 separate categories? And now, a lot of our population is just using cell phones. Y'all can see the whole assumption here was that we could copy and paste our same quantities of the same products, right, from one period to another. But in real life, people start substituting stuff out. They might start using DVDs instead of VHSs, and I think we've all, you know, made that switch. So the government has to statistically correct for that. Or the introduction of new products. How many people have some kind of tablet now? Maybe touchpad or, okay, you know, you get on a plane, it used to be everybody had a DVD player if they were watching the one that was provided for you, but you go to conferences, you're on planes, people are watching DVDs and taking notes on those little tablets now. It's a lot lighter than a regular laptop, so what do we do when a lot of people have a new item here that we didn't have before? Again, it kind of messes up the way that we were doing it, but our government is going to have to statistically correct for it. You know, going back to cell phones, you think about a $100 cell phone that you could buy last year versus a $100 cell phone that you can buy this year. Big difference, right? Even though it's the same price, the quality is so much better this year. There are going to be lots of features. You can probably get on the web with a $100 cell phone that you can buy now. And so we're only using the price. And you can see this is another possible problem with the way that we measure this consumer price index. It doesn't take into account the quality change. Okay, so those are some problems in measuring the CPI. Okay, make sure you know how to reason through these kinds of problems. Okay, if you had a 10% raise and inflation was 3% this year, okay, nominal, what does that mean again? Adjusted or not adjusted for inflation? Not adjusted for inflation. Okay, so we're not even looking at the inflation part to answer this question. If you had a 10% raise, what happens to your nominal income? Did you get a raise? You got a raise. It went up, increased by the full 10% because we're not taking into account inflation yet. Now, if we do take into account inflation, remember inflation is the cost of living. So we're talking about housing, food, and shelter, If that's 3% more expensive, what's going to happen to your real income? You don't experience the full benefit of your raise, right? If your cost of living, food, shelter has gone up by 3%, what happens to your real income? Good. Increased by 7%. Remember, real income, we are taking into account inflation. All right. I'm going to change these numbers just so we've got a different number. I'm going to say 4% here. Okay, if you had a 4% raise, what happens to your nominal income? Increased by 4%. Remember, nominal, we're not taking into account inflation. But when we are taking into account CPI going up by 10%. So that means gas, housing, clothing, food has gone up by 10% from one period to another. What's happened? Your real income has decreased by 6%. Okay, so when y'all are asking for raises and talking with your supervisors, probably once a year. If you're first hired, it might be more often than that. You might check out the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.gov, and you can find the latest CPI figure. Now, I've shared this with you on the first day. It's actually gone down, but this is monthly from March to April. If you're meeting with your supervisor once a year, you might want to see what's going on in the past year. So from last April 2012 to April 2010, the CPI has actually gone up by 1%. So if your supervisor says, well, we're all getting a 1% raise, I know it's only 1.1%, but you could make the argument our real incomes are actually going down. Because inflation is going up more than you're given in terms of a raise. Okay. Inflation is also important to think about after we retire. What's a pension? If you're lucky enough to get a pension after you retire, what's that? Yes, so you're retired, you don't have to go into work, but you're still getting paid, right? Whatever your salary was before, which is really nice. Well, let's pretend that you were making $30,000 per year in 1985. And you retire in 1985, and you're still living, you're pretty old, but you're still living now in 2013. And you're still getting $30,000, because that's what you retired at. Does that $30,000 today buy the same amount of stuff as it did in 1985? No way, no way. So it's important when to have some kind of clause like this. COLA, it just stands for the cost of living allowance. So and it's written into the contract that your pension or your pay would increase with the cost of living. Banks also have to think about inflation also. What are banks trying to do? I know we go there to, have a checking account and a savings account, but what's their goal for existence? To make money. And how do they make money? That's right. They use our money to make loans. And when they make a loan, let someone borrow some money, they charge them interest. For the privilege of borrowing money now, they'll pay a little bit back later in terms of interest. Now, the interest that they charge us, let me use our document camera here. Let's just pretend that Cynthia's buying a new house. Okay, so she is talking to the bank, and they give her a 9%, which would be really high, by the way, but for her mortgage loan, a 9% mortgage loan. But over the period of the loan, let's say inflation was 3%. So by the time Cynthia pays back you know, her obligation. You can think of this as the nominal interest rate that Cynthia is going to have on her promissory note on all the stuff that she signs with the bank. But after you take out inflation, at the end of the day, that's how much interest the bank is going to earn off of us. It's just like with our real and nominal incomes, right? We've got to take out inflation. The money that the banks are going to make off of us is going to depend on inflation, because by the time cost of living goes up, if we give back our money to them and there's been a lot of inflation, that money doesn't buy as much stuff. The purchasing power of our money has actually gone down if there's been a lot of inflation. And I've got that here at the bottom of the slide. The real interest rate that banks are going to get is going to be equal to the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. I'm going to skip over to this slide. Where does inflation come from? Well, we learned from Chapter 1 that it comes from the government printing too much money, but it can also come from people spending too much. Maybe they're just super optimistic about their future income, super optimistic about future employment or continued employment, and you all know when demand increases for a product, the equilibrium price is going to increase. And if that happens for food and shelter and clothing and computers and phones, if the demand for all of this increases, that'll drive up prices. We call that demand pull inflation. Now, another side of inflation, or another cause of inflation, might come from the supply side rather than the demand side. Remember I said with inflation at the beginning of the chapter, it's not just one thing getting more expensive, it's the CPI, which includes all of these items getting more expensive, right? There's one exception though. If gasoline gets more expensive, that will cause the second one, cost push inflation. Because how do we run all the machinery and equipment? I know some of it's steam powered, but a lot of it's with gasoline. How do we get our final products from the manufacturer to the retailer in this country? We truck it out there, right? We use planes, we use trucks. So this is the one thing from the supply side. If this gets more expensive, it could cause prices and cause inflation. We did not use this last formula yet, so let's take a look at this one. The real price of something is equal to the nominal price. And then you're looking at that ratio of the CPI. Actually, I think in the interest of time, we will not have this on the quiz tomorrow. We'll not have this. We'll talk about this after the quiz. So we'll finish this formula for chapter 11.